The easy answer is, well, you just have to like dive in and try to understand AI better, I think. Whatever you do with it, just understand it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an upside to not understanding it.
If students are having to do it in secret and not
Mhm.
and feel like they're doing something wrong, I think it just reduces the knowing with. If you do it with your children, if you kind of go and engage with AI and then talk about the experience,
It's an opportunity to share that journey with,
yeah,
with your
exactly.
kids.
Inhabiting a learner space with your students can be kind of cool.
That's pretty cool.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome back to Unhireable, your podcast for an honest take on early career. I'm Matt Erickson in the producer seat today, seated next to Miley. I'm usually not on this side, so this feels fun. It feels like I've got more power and control because there are more buttons. But joined by Kevin as usual and a new guest here on Unhireable. Kevin, will you introduce Anis?
Sure. Happy to do it. Excited to do it, and to welcome Anis Bawarshi, who is a professor of English here at UW and in our college, Arts and Sciences. And Anis is going to be here today talking because we were together at Family Weekend, but also going to be working with us in the coming year on an exciting project in Gesture that I'm excited to dive into. That is about learning about AI, learning with AI, learning how AI affects our learning, all other combinations of AI and learning that you can put in a sentence. But Anis is a genre expert, but also a general expert, I think, on many things, frankly, but especially on learning. So I'm excited to have you join us, Anis.
Thank you, Kevin.
We'll see how excited you are by the end of this, but right now I'm very excited that so.
Well, like you said, we presented at UW Family Weekend just a week ago. I have to say, it was exciting. We were in the Hub, which is the big, student union building here, in the ballroom. Really well attended. And one of the reasons why we're doing this is, A, it was well attended, and B, we didn't get through nearly the bulk of the questions that were asked of us. So a very engaged audience, which meant there's interest in this. So revisiting it for them and for those who weren't there. So maybe Kevin and Anis, can we just start off and have you situate what you talked about with those parents? I know, Kevin, some of the stuff would be familiar for our Unhireable listeners, but Anis's perspective on learning, I think, is novel, and it would be great for everyone to get caught up on that.
Well, like you said, I think we've covered a lot of the things. If you're an Unhireable listener or watcher, then you'll have heard these things in various forms before. But the presentation was about AI in particular, AI in early career, and so what I talked most about was the pivots that we made in the last year to AI, and in particular the takeaway, the lesson, I think, which was a little surprising, but fortunate for us, that the things we'd already been working on, mission, challenge, and story, turn out to be the things that are really important for people to engage AI. And so that part of the work, I think, is I can't say we entirely planned it that way, but I feel like that is very much consistent with the direction we were going. And so that makes me confident that we're in the right position to kind of, really approach AI in a curious way. That's kind of, we've talked about that in another episode. So I talked about that, and then we were able to, dig in a little bit deeper into learning with Anis, I think.
That was one of the things that really struck me, what you said, is that how people engage, how students engage with AI, also related to how employers want people to engage. So it's an interesting analogy. The main thing I was talking about was how do we teach things in ways that have longevity, that can travel across contexts. And this kind of comes out of the field that I am in, which is writing studies. And it turns out that the question of knowledge transfer, which is how does a learner do something what they've learned under a different set of conditions, in a different context. And it's a critical question to writing teaching, because we know that when you teach writing, it's not a skill that's learned once and for all. And so the art of it is, how do you teach skills and knowledge about writing, but also teach the ability to adapt it so that it can be useful in other contexts. And that has involved my field and my own interest for a long time in this study of knowledge transfer. And particularly, I talked about the distinction between near and far transfer. Near transfer is the application of skills and knowledge across contexts that are fairly similar. And in such cases, you can directly apply what you've learned before and reliably expect that it will work. Far transfer, which is the application of skills and knowledge across dissimilar contexts or vastly different conditions, turns out to be much more complicated, and direct application of knowledge does not usually work in there. And so this brings up another three terms that I shared at the family weekend, which is kinds of knowing that are typically involved in near and far transfer. So there's knowing how and knowing that. And knowing that is just factual knowledge. And knowing how is a procedural knowledge. And these kinds of knowledges tend to work really well in near transfer situations. If you know how to do something in one context and you encounter it again, you'll usually be able to apply the knowing how. And knowing that, again, if you know that in one situation, that same knowledge will be applicable. But in far transfer, knowing how and knowing that don't work as well. They have to be adapted. And that's where knowing with becomes critical. Knowing with is a kind of knowing that is built on analogy, transformation, abstraction. It's kind of how do you take what you've learned before and know with its underlying principles, or know with what it felt like to know that. It's a creative kind of knowing. It's not direct. And as it turns out, it is highly metacognitive. That is, being able to take skills and knowledge and know with them requires an awareness of how you know and how what you can take with what you've done before and what you can leave behind. And so knowing with is the gold standard of learning. And I was talking about how we often in classrooms, in higher education, in all education, it's the area we spend the least amount of time on. We spend a lot of time on knowing that and knowing how, but not knowing with. And so how to know with is what excites me about the idea of AI.
We've talked about this, before that event, but even as you were talking in the event, I feel like there is very much a parallel between the way that they didn't use these words obviously, but when they talked about sort of school learning in a way that as, they knew students knew stuff, and they were really sort of saying, yes, your students know, that and how, but we need people who know how to learn with and know how to know with. And that was, and further to say that generally speaking, students do not know that. And so I thought there was an interesting parallel there in the language, different language, but really talking about the same thing about being able to adapt, like you said, and being thoughtful and intentional and metacognitive about, what you knew before, how that applies here, what is the new context, what are the constraints, like that adaptation is, in some ways I wonder if it's almost weird to have the word learning encompass both of those things. They're almost different kinds of things, and maybe it's good that we do have it under one, because I feel like if we broke them up, everyone would say, well, we really just care about the knowing with. And then they would be like, well, we don't do that as much, but that would be embarrassing. So let's keep it under one umbrella right now. But but they seem almost like different kinds of things.
They are, but you need learning that, and you need knowing how and knowing that to know with. Right. So it's if all you had was a class on knowing with, it would be pretty abstract.
Right. That's my kind of class.
Well, no, as I'm talking about, that's what we're trying to do this winter.
Yes.
But there's still going to be something that you're engaged with. It's just an orientation to that.
Totally.
And so the knowing that and knowing how becomes the starting point, not the ending point.
Right.
And really the launch point for spending time thinking about, okay, what do you, and so you can establish the knowing that and knowing how pretty quickly in most classes, and then AI can help with that as well. But then figuring out how do you know with that? And making that the subject matter, that's hard because there's no blueprint, there's no formula,
Yep.
there's no technique for
Yep.
knowing with. But it is something that if you spend time and you can cultivate it, that's the thing. It can be cultivated. It's not just luck. It's not somebody has it and somebody doesn't. It can be cultivated, but it has to be deliberately. The space for it has to be deliberately created. But yeah, whether we call both of those things learning, I kind of like having the pressure put on the word learning by connecting the two, because it makes us think about learning as being more than just how and that.
Yes. I like that too. And I know we want to get to questions, but the other parallel that we talked about, I think, is, where does AI fit into those three things? And AI definitely, as you just mentioned, the pressure of AI is that it can enable the that and how much more easily than we do things in helping people learn the that and how that we needed school to do in the past. And if that's the case, then that should open the opportunity to direct our attention to learning and knowing with, if we can sort of reorient ourselves in that way.
Yeah, exactly. And as you've been talking about, so in that sense, AI creates opportunities for the knowing with to occur without shortchanging the how in that.
Right.
But as we've also been discussing as we're preparing for this winter course, there is something about AI and both its newness. There's something radically different about it, the way it gives us access to knowledge and creates knowledge and distributes knowledge. But at the same time, it helps reveal things about us. And so because of its sort of newness or its presence in higher education is new and fast changing, it's an opportunity for us. It gives us a chance to think about how we learn. Because we're confronted with something that most of the time, by the time we get to higher education or if we're faculty, we have spent our many, many years in higher education settings. And how we learn has become so habitual and unremarkable to ourselves that we don't interrogate it very much. We're set in it. And, and usually it's worked well enough for us, and we take it for granted. But when we confront AI now, it is revealing to us things about our learning. And I've been struck by how many, when I talk to colleagues, their relationship to AI tends to reveal something about who they are as learners.
Yeah.
This is great. I feel like we've got a bunch of questions now for you to expand on some of these things. A few of these were actually asked in our forum, but some of them are new. But for the sake of everyone being on the same page, we'll just get going and try to organize some of these in university-wide approaches, learning, some of the effects on career. But let's just dig into, and either of you can answer any of these as they come forward. So big picture one, how is UW approaching the use of AI in teaching and learning? And are there university-wide policies, or is this just left to instructors?
I would say that UW is a little bit behind other institutions, but all higher ed institutions are wrestling with this right now and struggling a little bit. And on one hand, that seems negative. I mean, it's hard to cast that as a positive, but I think everyone's struggling. So I don't know that they're necessarily fundamentally struggling more than companies, or they're a little. I think we're a little slower, which is common to the way we work. I guess if we were generous, we could say deliberate. But like Anis was saying, I think it presents a much more sort of fundamental challenge or moment of rethinking to our work than it does in maybe some other domains or other industries, and that makes things go a little bit more slowly. And so I think, and on top of that, our structure has generally been very decentralized, not necessarily, not formally to individual faculty, but at least to departments and disciplines. In practice, often to individual faculty. So we're just kind of following our normal practice in that way. And I think there are institutions that have moved a little bit more quickly, but but in terms of policy, they're all pretty vague. They're all pretty decentralized. It's because the definitions are not clear, and how we would draw lines around things is not clear. Where we've probably made the most gains institutionally are at least at places that have started to embrace broader use of different tools so people can get used to it. So I think we're just starting that path at UW.
Yeah, I would agree. I agree, and I think I would just say that you're seeing pockets
Yes.
of these things. So partly because of the decentralized nature, but you see there are programs, there are departments that will have some policies, centers, programs in the writing program where there are some policies there, but it's not widely universally shared. I think the Center for Teaching and Learning has been doing best practices documents, and then there are task forces and so on.
Right.
But it is scattered.
It's really helpful, and actually, your answers answered a few of those other questions related to where that sits, what that looks like. I'll just add that one of the things that is so hard is because AI, like you said, is so new for so many institutions of higher ed. There are things that happen week by week here that we're just learning about for the very first time, and so it is emergent in terms of use and use cases here on campus. So I'm sure this will be vastly outdated by the time we actually get around to putting this up on the web for people to listen to. Let's pivot into actually teaching and learning with AI. So this is an interesting question. Someone asked, how do you teach students the difference between agentic and generative AI and when to use each?
That's an interesting one because I do think, and I don't know what your sense is, I feel like one of the barriers to learning AI, which I didn't really fully anticipate at the beginning, is that generative models are non-deterministic. They're not. It's not linear models where you put in A and you're always going to get out B. Things can be a little bit different each time because it is, it's generating a new answer, and so we don't. That's not our usual mental model for causality. We definitely default to linear sort of causal models where X will always cause Y. Did I say A, B? A would always cause B, versus A will have some probability of causing B, but might be C or might be D or might be like that. That's hard for us to process, and but that's how these models work, and so I think that has been a barrier to people understanding, what's going to come out when you ask it a question. What is it capable of doing? What are the risks? What are the limits? What kind of questions can I ask that are going to generate the answers and what information do I need to give it? So I think the how to teach that, to answer that question, is to probably first understand that those models are not linear models and predictive models the way that many other computing models are. And then to treat those accordingly in how you learn them, that you would have to basically be a little bit more exploratory in your use, to try multiple use cases, to understand or try different multiple approaches to a given use case, different kinds of prompts, different kinds of information, different kinds of ways of wording things, different models, because different the multiple models in ChatGPT or in any of the large models, they're all a little different. And which one works for which context. So it makes it quite a bit harder to say this is what AI does. And that barrier alone seems to be a barrier to make people like, okay, I can't, there's too many models, too much stuff going on. I can't deal with it, which is understandable, but that is in fact, that there's no way around that. That's how these models are.
Yeah, no, that's interesting to hear describe it that way. I agree. I think, but that iterative generative kind of knowledge-making process, if you open it up to become an opportunity to understand, like, what are the possible ways of answering a particular question or producing a kind of particular text, you can start seeing the different iterations and then look to see what they offer as possibilities.
Yes.
And then start doing combinations of those. I think that only becomes a problem for me, the iterative, nonlinear, if you're seeing AI as giving you the answer.
Correct. Yeah.
But if you see it as actually demonstrating knowledge, like answering, dramatizing it in some way, it becomes then the thing you can actually look at and compare the different iterations
Yep.
and see why are all these different possibilities? How can they all be correct? Or in what ways can they all be correct? And what ways, what do they miss? And when you combine them together.
I totally agree. And I think we sort of go out of our way to make clear that AI is not, that it is artificial, that it's not human, right? I mean, it seems kind of obvious, but I feel like we sort of overstate that in a way that pushes us to this sort of deterministic model of what a computer does, or like you said, gives us the right answer. So in fact, if you ask me the same question on different days, I'm going to give you a different answer.
Exactly.
And so the notion that we are in fact less that are more deterministic than, I mean, that's crazy. That is like talking to a person.
Yeah.
And they're going to give them a different answer if you get them in a different mood, if they know different stuff, if if they just came off of, the horrible Game 7 of the ALCS and the Mariners lost. Like I had certain kinds of answers to questions then that I would not have at other times. Yes, let's just re-experience that. So I wouldn't say that that's exactly the metaphor to use in understanding AI, but to think it's just a box that's going to give you an answer and it's either right or wrong, I think is misreading what it is in a way. And it is closer to that, well, okay, how do I understand like what the usual answer would be, what the typical answer would be, what is the range of answers, how I can change that with more information and context.
It becomes about learning across difference. You're right. I mean, you were talking about within the same person getting different answers on different days, but much more even starkly, you ask different people in different communities the same questions, and you get different answers. And so we don't know how to handle this very well. These differences have become sources of entrenchment and separation. And so learning how to where certain things come from, where certain predictions and probabilities coming from that lead somebody to have a certain perspective on something or stance, it could do us well to be spending time in the nonlinear.
Yes.
So to dovetail on that, you spoke to this a little bit, but I'm going to ask Anis this one directly. What strategies help students learn with AI, developing the knowing with, rather than simply using AI?
Well, I mean, I think, again, it starts with what you are trying to do with it. If you're trying to get an answer from it, if you're trying to solve a problem, or have a thinking partner, that's all, and so many others. There's all good uses. But knowing with would require you to do these things, but then at the same time to also be stepping back and watching your own engagement and thinking about, why does it bother me that I get different answers every time I ask the same question? Okay? Like that would be knowing with, because you are changing your relationship to this thing, where it's not just what is it giving me, but what do I experience when I engage with it. So that would be one way of knowing with. It's also it's a chance to think about, well, what kind of questions do you ask, and when you don't get the answers that you would want, knowing with becomes thinking about, well, how can I ask different questions? And so it's a chance to try out your methods for engagement, because it's usually like in a classroom, if you ask a question, the teacher can redirect it. Other students can redirect it, and then things can become maybe seamless, or just like they lead in certain directions that are guided by the classroom structure. With AI, you really are, it exposes you to yourself, and it shows you, what may be better ways to engage. So that's also knowing with. And then finally, I'll say knowing with what is given to you from AI. And so that is when you get a particular answer, to try to think about, where did this come from? Why was this the algorithmic predicted probabilistic response to this? And what does it tell me about how knowledge is made? That this would be the answer or the response I would get. But I think mostly it's a chance to spend time thinking about how you engage with AI and what how you might find new ways to get like again, our relationship to teachers has been worked out over a long period of time by the time we get to college, and so it doesn't require us to rethink things in the same way. But with AI, it really does. How you collaborate with it, how you ask it questions, how you take its answers, can reveal a lot about how you ask, how you learn, and how you know. And it's a chance to see that unfold in real time and discover if there are other ways.
Well, it's interesting because I think we talked about sort of the analogs between, between learning to AI and learning to early career and sort of how those things are connected. I think a lot of what you're talking about is exactly what employers mean when they say, I need new employees to be able to understand, to sort of read the room, right? Because it's exactly what you ask a question, you have a conversation with a regular human, right? And they respond in a way that you didn't expect, give you an answer you didn't, and we want people to go like, okay, why'd they say that? Or what were you thinking? Or how did I ask my question to you? Maybe you misunderstood. And it's the same sort of process of understanding other people and their perspective that we want people to be able to do in a general way. Like we've been saying, the fact that people have trouble with that in AI makes me worried that they also have trouble with that with other humans.
Yes.
And that's a sense in which, the work that we would do with AI is directly related to what we would expect them to interact with humans.
Exactly. And in live settings like that, there's not time to really, afterwards you can think about what happened.
Right.
But AI is a training ground for working through these experiences. And I think we miss out a lot. Like when I just subscribed to the pro version of Claude. And I'm realizing, if my mindset initially, well, I just need to know how to ask it good questions. I'm missing the point. So I just started spending time learning how to communicate with it and realizing it's helping me learn about myself, as a learner. And I think that's the opportunity. It's a training ground for thinking about how you learn.
I'm actually massaging some of these questions together because you're touching on some of these points that, which is great. So we're going through them quickly. I really like this one actually, since you're both speaking to where AI sits right now in the current sort of student trajectory and learning. How might have AI changed your own research and academic career paths if it had existed when you were a student?
So two areas for me. So I was always interested in non-deterministic systems and simulation. So it would have affected that, and it would have advanced that, I think, more quickly. And then at one point I was also interested in content analysis in sociology. So qualitative analysis of text and looking for patterns. And that was something that you would have to do by hand. And interestingly, the notion that this, again, goes back to what we were saying, that if we gave some text to an AI and asked it to interpret it, we could find out, oh, that's good, whether we agree or we disagree with that. But as we've been saying, that was the task of qualitative analysis before with a human. But you couldn't just trust one human to do it. You'd have to get multiple humans to do it and see if they agreed. And so, which actually is even easier with AI, assuming that they can, you can compare that to humans or whatever. So I think the point is that it allows analysis of and pattern recognition of big things that we could not have done in the past. So that happened to be that would have changed probably the things I studied or accelerated that in quite a lot of ways. Yeah,
I mean, I agree that, and already before this generative AI, we were relying on coding software to sort of do this large scale analysis. So this makes it more interactive.
Right.
As a genre scholar, I think what which is what I was studying. I mean, when I first started in graduate school, it caught my attention is how genres become part of our patterned ways of recognizing and responding to situations that recur. And so AI, for me, if it was at the time, available, it would have been an opportunity to see how AI is a kind of a genre machine in the same way that humans are, but to compare AI and human uses of genres, because we're both rely on predictions and probabilities. Genres help us predict what would be the best response in a situation, and they provide us with a typified strategies for doing so. AI works because we are, as humans, reliant on genres. So it would have been interesting to me to see how our relationship to AI is actually rooted in a common instinct. We're pattern creatures.
Exactly, and and this is one of the things we've talked a lot about in the similarity of our sort of conceptual background from schemas is the word that I would have used to genres, but I think the lesson in both cases, you're right. Like we perceive ourselves as being completely independent, completely autonomous actors, and we're just doing unique things that no one's ever done before.
Yes.
And and the sociologists like, no, you're doing the same thing everybody else has done for like 1,000 years, and so what are those patterns across that?
Exactly, and like the title of my dissertation was Genre and the Invention of the Writer. And the argument was there that we think of kind of invention as starting within us and we're autonomous. And in fact, genres invent us as much as we invent them. And so, that was a kind of a predisposition to.
Well, so I would invite listeners to our 12-hour podcast on our dissertations, because that's going to be an awesome one. I can't wait to.
The most boring one ever. But it does speak to something that I think is important, that there is an affective
totally
basis for engagement, right? Like you and I had something that made AI feel less threatening because it was recognizable to intellectual interests that we had. And so we could bring that. So it was easy for us to have an intellectual engagement with AI because it had a familiar intellectual feeling. And I'm meaning like the affective.
Yes.
And I think those for whom it is hard to conceive of its intellectual basis then end up finding ways to guard against it.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of also what we were talking about earlier about how do you know with AI? Part of it is having to really come to not come to terms. That's too strong. But you have to confront something about the emotional underpinnings, because a lot of the responses are that. And knowing with, I think, is enabled or prevented by emotion. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about emotion in learning, but knowing with, the research on knowledge transfer shows affective relation to knowledge can affect how somebody transfers it or not.
I had a really negative affective experience to Arthur Miller's to The Crucible when I was in high school, and I never wanted to read any drama for like 10 years after that.
Wow.
So I physically defaced
So
the
it
book.
created a block.
Yes, totally. I hate it. I still hate him, really. God rest his soul. I think he's dead, right? Anyway, you raise a point that we've also talked about, which is when AI first, and this was admittedly the overly optimistic version, but, the notion of a complete sort of resetting of the field and democratization and access to many people who never had access to be able to change their career or do other things, and the speed with which access was expanded to the world is definitely unprecedented, right? Like if there's 800 million people using ChatGPT weekly, it's like a tenth of the world is, and that would have taken, that took decades and other kinds of hardware-based kinds of changes. But so I think there was this notion, at least I had the optimistic sense that, wow, we can kind of reset, we can get rid of some of the stratification that we had in the past. Not all of it, for sure. I mean, let's be real. But that affective sort of resistance, or the natural reaction that is sort of like resistance that comes if you have a negative affective connection to that in whatever form, it maps onto the existing lines of, and so we're wasting that opportunity to reset the field. And the same people who are, it's the same people who already have either power or technical background who are most likely to be open to that. And the opportunity is there, but it's closing fast in some ways for people who could not get into that before. That was the window, but I think you're exactly right. There are other reasons why they're hesitating, or perhaps convincing themselves that they don't need to do that, or at least learn about it. I'm not saying any particular. And that I definitely fear will end up with the same distribution of people that we had before.
Yeah, and that's the risk of the humanness setting out.
Exactly.
From these. Yeah.
Exactly.
Really great questions, and I think we're getting some great answers here. So this is a good one from an area of questions we heard a lot from, because this is a parent audience mainly. How can parents stay relevant and supportive even when their own professional and academic experiences feel so outdated in the AI era? And this is good because we actually have two parents of either current or recently graduated college students over there getting filmed today. So.
Yes. Yeah, I have an unemployed graduate at home, so I know how that is. But I think it is it's a different kind of anxiety than I assume that the actual graduate is facing. But it is a legitimate anxiety, and I think rooted in the same base, which is the path you kind of thought you understood is now being disrupted in a way that it's not like move from this path to that one. Now it's like I don't even know what the paths are anymore. And I'm not sure what works. I'm not sure what advice to give. I'm not sure what prediction to make, or where to sort of make your bets. And it feels like everything is sort of I was going to say everything's unraveling. I don't necessarily mean that, although sometimes it feels like that. But more our mental paths are starting to unravel, and how college relates to career, and because it is mid-career, late career as well, then you're sort of simultaneously figuring that out in your own career as well as for your kids, and it feels like dealing with that requires the same set of skills and the same mindset as dealing with AI itself, which is we're going to have to be more flexible and adaptive, more contextual, more able to make adjustments in the moment, and not be as tied to particular linear paths that we have in some cases been confident about for decades. And they just but that, again, going back to what you mentioned about the connection to kind of affective reactions and to identity, we will have invested a lot of our lives in some path, and then you take that path away, that's going to be sort of hard for anyone to get their head around in any short period of time. And then throw that on top of, I just put my kid through college, and now what do I? So the easy answer is, well, you just have to dive in and try to understand AI better, I think. Whatever you do with it, just understand it. I don't think there's an upside to not understanding it. But easier said than done in some ways. Maybe an opportunity to, on one hand, I would say it's an opportunity to share that journey with with your kids if you're a parent, and also just recognizing that those are slightly different journeys. Especially I think in college. It's one thing in high school or below when you're still sort of, the journey is how we get through school. But the launch from college to career is there's a lot of weight on that, and so that is like a reinvention moment. It's always been a reinvention moment, and so to add extra sort of pressure on that, I think. But if it's possible to create a let's learn together vibe.
Yeah. I mean, no, I was thinking the same thing. I mean, the way we don't allow for knowing with is if we make the use of AI something secretive. It's not going to lend itself to the knowing with. And so, I mean, knowing with is the term here that is predicated on relation. That and how there's a separation between the thing that you're learning and the learner. Knowing with, you can't. Knowing with is relational. It's based on how do you relate to the things? How does it get into you? How does it? And so that has to be done in a way, like it can be enhanced the more you make the experience itself with a kind of experience. So I think if your kids, if students are having to do it in secret and not and feel like they're doing something wrong, I think it just reduces the knowing with. And so if you do it with your children, if you even say, hey, what are you studying? I mean, like, we're always asking our kids, like, how was your
Right.
day? And then, like, there's no answer. That makes you think
fine.
nothing happened that day, especially in high school. It's
Yeah.
like the death knell question, like,
Yes.
shuts off everything. But if you just kind of say, what are you reading? And then you kind of go and engage with AI and then talk about the experience. I think just spending time with it and having it. We get older again, like we lose connection with who we are as learners. It just operates kind of like a RAM, behind the scenes. And anything that helps us begin to, I'm so convinced that it can help expose ourselves to ourselves.
Yep.
And so spending time with that and inhabiting a learner space with your students can be kind of cool.
That's pretty cool. Very.
So a follow-up question to that I think is relevant, and this is for students or parents. Which AI tools should students or learners learn first, or is there a path to developing AI literacy that seems most sort of direct that you can or can't advise to?
I mean, I'm looking to Kevin here because one of the things that really impresses me about you, Kevin, is that you have been thinking with and knowing with AI for a long time, and you've been spending time cultivating a kind of a thought partnership, learning partnership with it. I'm newer in this, so I'd be curious to hear your journey, and then I can speak to mine. Mine is still more incipient.
Yeah, it's a great question, one we've wrestled with for quite a while, and one that is it's sort of very meta, not only because of the metacognition part, but because of the knowing that AI is changing so quickly. We have to both sort of learn about what's happening to AI without even using it, and then also experience those things in AI itself, right? And I think there's a sort of parallel kind of continuous learning that has to happen because you're learning about changes in models or new things coming out or new capabilities. You don't actually have time to do all those things, but you kind of need to know they're happening so that you can, I'm going to go try that one, or I'm going to try this one, and to know what term they're talking about, and that takes that's probably a full-time job unto itself, and then there's another one in the actual immersion in something. But I think what I learned is that it isn't really going to be linear learning, right? And so people look for that, understandably, and that's probably more in the that and how, right? Like, where's my primer, or where should I start? Can I do this? And where's my 10 steps to learn AI? Which, there's stuff out there.
That's syllabus learning too.
That's syllabus learning, exactly. And there's a place for that. I think it still is a weird looking syllabus, which we'll find out next quarter. But there is a time and a place for that. In fact, there was a recent article. We can put a link. Is what they say, like put a link down below in the show. Well, if you subscribe, we'll send you the link or click on it, whatever. Anyway, that you're gonna have to edit all that. But so there was an article recently that I thought was a good kind of state of the current models piece that we can put a link to. That you read it quick because that's going to be out of date. But he does one of those. Is a professor at Wharton who does, I think, one of those every 6 months or so. But that I think is really for people who know a little bit about what the models are and kind of it compares them a little bit. How do you begin? I think the question implied that as well, right? Like from the very beginning. I would say just dive in and understand that the task is to to learn how to ask questions and communicate with it, rather than learn how to use it, learn how to communicate with it, like you mentioned. And what kinds of questions, what kinds of answers do you get to what certain kinds of questions?
Yeah.
How much depth, how much, and treat it like you're meeting the person in a lot of ways, and you're just trying to get to know them. Like, how do they think? What do they know about? What are their, how do they tend to talk? What do they not like to talk about or talk too much about or whatever? And just try to get a sense of them. And it requires all the things that you've been mentioning, which is really to be sort of extremely or the highest level of metacognitive, like just, why did I ask that? Why did they respond to that? Kind of pause, think about that. And you can just ask the AI, why did you respond that way?
Yes.
And it will tell you. The other thing I would say is that there is, if you want a linear path from the very beginning, you probably can just ask AI. You can, actually. I don't know anything about AI. Help me understand that. And it will actually produce, it will ask you probably a question or two. What do you, tell me what your background is, whatever. And if you say, I just need, a 3-hour primer, it will just make one for you. I need a 10-hour primer. I need a 10-week one. I need to top the, it will make all those things. And the big models now have a learning mode, which is a little too schoolish, I think, in the long run. But there are applications, a very sort of that and how kind of mode, and you can just click the thing on the learning, and it will just make you a syllabus essentially for any topic, including AI, as detailed as you want it to be. Show me exactly how transformer models work. Show me all the equations. I wouldn't recommend that, but that or I want a first grade level. I want a 10th grade level. I want it in an hour. I want it to explain it to me like I was born in 1850 or whatever. I don't know. It will do all those things, and I think to your point, experiencing that engagement is actually the AI learning, not the content that comes out of that.
Exactly. Over the weekend, I was reading some of the pieces you shared with me, especially about CLA and like sports. And I was thinking about just moving away from drills and repetitions to actually creating occasions for play and learning as you play. It seems to me the same thing, just play.
I agree. Yeah, I think letting yourself play instead of feeling like I have to learn it, that you kind of have to make that switch, because you will be frustrated, I think, if you just try to look for a syllabus, bring me up to level 2.
Yeah.
So let's take that question and flip it. We had a whole cluster of questions around sort of security, privacy, and integrity. So for both of you, now that you're using it in these spaces, what does AI integrity mean in practice? And how does privacy interplay with that? And where are you at in telling or working with students in particular about trusted models and platforms?
Well, what we tell students is that so there are, I would say, a set of privacy issues and security issues. So security issues would be, if someone is going to break into something or hack into something and steal your data like that. Some of that you can't really control. And that particularly becomes an issue if you start building things like with vibe coding or whatever. Then there are. So those are sort of the relatively more technical things. I think the solution there is to not put anything into AI, or protect your information the same way you would protect it generally in digital spaces, and try to avoid putting personal information in places where you wouldn't want it to be exposed. So that's on the straight security side. The privacy side, I think, is that AI companies will use whatever you put in to train their models, and in that sense, whatever you put in sort of gets learned by future versions of the model. And with paid models, you can turn that off. And so you can say, I'm going to just engage, but you may not use my responses to train your model. And that we recommend. Again, if you're only doing generic things, it probably doesn't matter that much. They're not really trying to train for particular content. They're trying to train to understand how people talk and think and all that kind of thing. But that's something we can control. So I think privacy and security are different in that way. In free models, you often do not have the ability to control privacy. So that, I think, then we would want to be clear, and this goes to your question about university sanctioned or institutionally sanctioned models. If we have a model at this institution where it doesn't sort of have the powerful model, but if you log in, then it will protect your privacy. So I think that's a valid consideration to be able to say, say, no, do not train on my model. And the models are all, or do not train your model on my responses. The models differ in how they handle those things.
I mean, that in some ways, this is the most important question as we go forward. I mean, we can talk about all the things with learning, but so you've touched on the privacy and the security. I think I'll say something about the ethics, but just maybe I'll say something that we may need may get me in trouble. But it's the idea of before we get to ethics for a second, just like privacy. Is absolutely, it's important to protect our data, especially when we have maybe sensitive information that will then become part of the all the data sets that it's using. But I think the idea of ideas being owned,
Yes.
it is a recent one. Copyright, authorship, all these things are not, that they emerged at a certain point in time. They're not that humans have been making knowledge well before copyright protection. And I've always, I resist, the idea that, again, this is where I can get in trouble, but I'm not alone in sort of questioning the over fetishizing of individuality and also this iron kind of response to plagiarism and things like that. I mean, so much of knowledge making is passed on in oral traditions. It's not copyrighted, And so, I mean, on one hand, I'm curious to see if AI is going to take us to a sort of a pre-copyright time again, where we think of knowledge as collective. And so much of what we get, like in Disney, which has been so protective of copyright, it took almost all its stories from fairy tales, but just copyrighted them. So there's something ironic about that. But that's to me it's an intellectual question of whether we're in a period of time where we need to start rethinking collectivity of knowledge and the protection of it. But that's kind of related to privacy, but maybe not. But as far as ethics go, I think we do have to figure out ways to have students acknowledge what they're getting from AI, not to cite it necessarily, because it's not the same. It's not plagiarism when you're using AI. It's creating new combinations of things that you're not taking somebody else's exact words. But how to acknowledge your debt to learning that came, kind of an acknowledgement, I think is important. The ethics of just the environmental impact is one. I know we're still in the midst of transformations, and so who knows long term what that would be. But that to me is also an ethical question, and then I think probably ethical too. But this would apply to non-AI uses. Where do your ideas come from, and how do you be responsible to them?
Right.
I think we don't ask students enough to think about how do you be responsible to what you know. This is different than copyright and indigenous storytelling does not use our copyright, but it's certainly about how do you be responsible to the stories that you've been given, and how do you engage them in truthful, relational, ethical ways. I think that is a question to be asking of our use of AI. How do we be responsible to the knowledge that it is giving into us, and then how to be responsible to when it actually reproduces biases and harms.
Before we get to our last question, just a huge thank you to all the parents and families who attended our event, who gave us this bank of questions to go off of because they've given us such robust conversation and answers here. Particularly in the space that we're asking students to enter, I really like this one for a finale. Could you share a real-world example of how writing or creating with AI has played out successfully for you?
Well, I mean, I'll just give a recent example. I was I gave a lecture and a workshop at another university a couple weeks ago, and the topic was actually about communicating across radical difference, and I was interested in how at this point in time when divisions are so entrenched, trying to engage with concepts on which we have radically different perspectives on it. It feels to me that the point in time when we try to argue about different stances is no longer there, but how do we spend time in between our stances? And so it was a paper about uptake, which is this: how do we hold things together to make certain expressions possible? And so, like, when you get to a certain position on something, what has needed to be held together for you to move towards a particular position, and then to use our uptake process as the site of deliberation, which essentially means trying to understand how we get places, and then lingering in these connective places. Anyway, with AI, I had written the paper, but I was coming to the conclusion that art helps us linger longer in the connective places because it slows us down.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we see an art piece, or we listen to music, or we read a poem, it asks us to think about something in a slow way, and in a way that allows us to think about how did we know something, and how do we unknow something. And so, like, and so it's like kind of, there's a poem by Dylan Thomas where he writes once below a time, and like once below a time thinking. So anyway, with AI, I started having this long conversation about, like, how does art help us slow down our uptakes? How does a once below a time literally slows your uptake? Once upon a time speeds up your uptake. I know what's going to come next. I'm ready for it. Once below a time, whoa, I'm now having to understand, how do I get somewhere? And so AI, the AI large language model I was using, we started thinking about this question together. And by the end, something unexpected occurred, which was it wrote a poem that came out of our whole set of conversations. And it was a poem about the in-betweens. And it ended with something like, sometimes the in-between is where we begin. And that really helped me understand art, because not only were we discussing it, we created art that was doing that. And that ended up being the last line of my paper.
Well, I don't have a good example like that. I mean, I think that's a great example. I, in some ways, a measure of how much I use it, I think, is that it's been more of a gradual evolution in what I think of as sort of thinking and writing. It's not, I wouldn't, a couple of years ago, if I said, oh, I got to write something, I just, open up a Word doc or start typing or something like that, maybe take some notes. And, I had various sort of pre-AI processes. And now I definitely don't feel like I have the method that I'm going to use 5 years from now, but I don't follow that same process anymore. And I will have multiple conversations with AI connected to other things. So I feel like the uses are, this is probably not totally systematic, but one is thinking partner, like you said, and I think it's quite effective at that once you learn how to have conversations with it. It can take different perspectives, but I think once you learn to ask questions, then it doesn't really, you don't even have to tell it to do that. It kind of brings those in. So that's one sort of tool. And the other is, and this is one of the key areas of growth in those kind of models, is memory. And so what does it know about you already? What does it know about previous conversations? What other information can you bring in? Or did you forget to bring in and then it hasn't? So I feel like I'm constantly thinking about what it knows. Not so much, that's really the that problem of the AI itself, right? What is it? Oh, in this conversation, I didn't mention X. So sometimes it used to just forget whatever was not in that chat, right? But now it sometimes remembers. But I'm always have to like, what do you know when we're talking? Do you know about this? Do you know about that? Do you know about this program and gesture? No, I didn't tell you, so I got to put that document in. Or this is like the conversation. We talked about it yesterday? Oh no, wait, sorry, that was the other AI model. No offense. And so then we have to bring things over, and so there's a certain kind of additional work, but it is, I think, starting to reframe how or make me much more conscious of what kind of stuff are we working with here? And then I'm kind of putting together and to write something or think about something. And so memory, and which is another way of talking about context, like what the model knows, what the model is thinking about, and how much can it hold in its head, its RAM head, well, maybe not just RAM actually, it's and whatever, and that is, but it would be easy for me to say, like, don't worry about that. It doesn't remember enough. But in fact, it can tie things together from multiple places in ways that is more powerful than I can do. So something we've talked about before is I think it's evolving towards, I think of it sort of as a second brain in a lot of ways. Limited in many ways, but there are tasks that I would not imagine not starting out and doing in some way together. I think for writing, I still end up with writing things myself, but it doesn't do well enough yet to where I'd be like, oh, I'm just going to send that off. But I think that's actually something I'm interested. I continually try to get it there, and that work, because I think when it gets there, if it ever gets there, that means I will have learned a lot about how to work with it.
Well, I hope for all the parents who submitted questions, the questions have been answered. If you have more questions, you know how to get a hold of us. We're on all the socials. And looking forward to continue this conversation with other faculty, with other students as we move forward. So Kevin, Anis, thank you so much, and thank you to the parents for all these great questions today.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Want to hear more from Gesture? Check out the rest of the Unhireable podcast on YouTube and Spotify. For even more content, follow us on TikTok and Instagram at gesture_UW.